Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. Now, on today's episode, I have a very special guest as we will be discussing Slayer's first 6 releases, starting with their first album, Show No Mercy, up to and including Seasons in the Abyss. We will be discussing each album, giving you our favorite songs from these albums, and at the end, ranking them for you. Along the way, we will also be sharing some interesting historical factoids on the band and the albums. So joining me for this task is British author Joel McIver. Joel is the editor of Bass Player magazine, a journalist with 25 years experience in the music field, and he's also the author of 35 books, including one on Slayer titled The Bloody Reign of Slayer. I have a few of his books here in my collection. I have his Randy Rhoads, Crazy Train, The Life and Tragic Death of Randy Rhoads. You know, everybody out there knows I'm a huge Black Sabbath fan, so of course I have Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. And I have his book on Cliff Burton, To Live Is to Die. So Joel, thank you for joining me here today at The Lair.
Oh, come on. Thanks for having me on. The privilege is mine.
Awesome. You can find any information you want to find on Joel. You can look him up on social media. He's got a Facebook page. He has various things on social media. He's all over that stuff. So if you throw his name into Google, it will certainly come up. So Joel, I actually had your Slayer book. And there's a funny story behind it. Well, I think I lent it to somebody, and you know how that goes. I lent it to somebody, never got it back.
Yeah.
But I have a certain memory attached to that Slayer book. I bought it right before my family went on a vacation. And I thought, this is going to be my book to read over vacation. So I was reading it through the vacation. Then I landed up getting food poisoning on like the last couple days. And so I had this very clear memory of me sitting in the bathroom while my family's out enjoying themselves, reading your Slayer book on the floor of the bathroom in between getting sick. It wasn't your book that got me sick. It was those bad clams. Your book was making me feel better. But
so when you think about me as an author, you think about gastric distress, is what you're saying.
No, not at all. I think about you making me feel better from those bad clams that I had there on the beach on vacation.
No, I quite like that. It's a good story. Not one I've heard before.
Right. So I always tell people it's funny how I have certain memories of certain records. I heard them for the first time. That Slayer book brings back that memory of that. But I love the book, and it got me through that bad bout.
Good. I'm glad it provided you with some relief.
All right, so Joel, how and when did you discover Slayer, and what were your early memories of
Well,
it?
you know, I've told the story before a couple of times. I was a really late starter when it came to metal. I grew up in a small village in the southwest of England, and I was actually 17 before I got into any kind of metal. My good friend John, who lived over the road from me, he did 2 things for me in the spring of 1988 when I was 17. First, he introduced me to playing the bass. We had bass guitar lessons together. And that has subsequently gone on to basically pay my bills my entire life because I'm the editor of Bass Player magazine. So I owe him many thanks for that. And at the same time, he played me Metallica's Master of Puppets record. And I'd heard of metal before that. But you have to remember, I think I'm probably a bit older than you, John. I had grown up in the 80s when metal was really quite weak, a lot of it, you know, and embarrassing. And I would never listen to it. And I was much more interested in listening to the Beatles and Deep Purple and, you know, and Duran Duran actually, and all that kind of 80s pop stuff, which I still like. But then when I heard Puppets, my mind was completely blown. Right? I mean, the speed of it, the sort of the anger, the malevolence, the incredibly good production, it just drilled into me. And I started exploring other metal. And so, having done most of Metallica, I read that I really should get into Slayer, and that was another level too. That was another step up, right? Because Metallica, obviously, if you're listening to the Puppets era and the Lightning era, it's all very sophisticated, right? And it's beautifully produced and it's quite symphonic and there's orchestral parts, not in the sense that there are stringed instruments, but that the arrangements are kind of epic, aren't they, and majestic. And then you listen to Slayer, especially back then, I think South of Heaven was just coming out, or maybe it was just out. So I listened to the first 3 records. And Rain and Blood just destroyed me, John. To this day, I remember hearing it for the first time. And those songs were like spikes going in my head, but in a really enjoyable way. And I could not get enough of the artwork and the lyrics and the crazy speed of the music. And I got into the other big four thrash bands and all the B League lot, the Creators and Testaments and Sepulturas, the rest of them. But really, my big thing was Metallica and Slayer, and always was. And as the years passed, obviously, I got into everything else. I got big into death metal and a lot of black metal and so on, like we all do, right? The obvious stuff, as well as going back historically and getting into Sabbath and Maiden and Priest and Motorhead and all that. So, you gain a kind of education there. Um, but I cannot tell you how much of a Slayer nerd I was for years. I still am, but I listened to everything else as well. But back then, I was just so into Slayer, right? I was like, probably about when I was about 20, 22, I had a cassette with Rain and Blood on one side and Hello Waits on the other side, and I would just rotate them constantly. And every now and then listen to, I don't know. I never, as you'll see when we talk about this, I was never really a huge fan of Show No Mercy. I appreciate it, but it's not the Slayer album I would put on for pleasure. That was always Hello Waits and Rain and Blood. And I did get into South a bit, and then I got into Seasons and so on and so on. So that's a long answer to a short question, basically.
Awesome. Yeah, I discovered them. I tell this story on my channel all the time. When I first started getting into metal, I discovered AC/DC in 1980, and I lived in a remote place in northeastern Pennsylvania. And my gateway to the outside world was college radio.
Mm,
And there was a college radio station that they did a metal show. It seemed like every night, so I would sit up and buy these 99-cent cassettes and make copies of things. And they were playing stuff like, Motorhead and Saxon and this
mm.
Iron Maiden and all this stuff. And I tell this story all the time, but it's funny. The innocence of youth. They were playing Kill 'Em All from Metallica, but this is way before the internet. We're talking, when did Kill 'Em All come out? 83 or 84.
Mm. 83.
And so the DJs were not pronouncing the name of the band correctly. They were saying Metallica.
Oh, please.
So I was walking around my school telling kids, like, you gotta hear this new band. They just put out their first album. They're called Metallica. And finally, like, some older kid said to me, Metallica, are you
What the
talking
hell,
about
man? Oh,
Metallica?
that's fantastic. I love that.
So
But that
still
happens all
to
the time. I mean, you probably know loads of mainland European metal fans, and they especially in German, they tend to run words together and spell them differently, pronounce them in a weird way. And then in Germany specifically, they will pronounce the umlaut on Motorhead, right? So it's Motorhead, and on Motley Crue, it's Motley Crue, and all this. So I love the idiosyncrasies of metal language, and the fact that they called it Metallica, that's gold. I mean, that is a story to treasure.
yeah.
That's a
And
good one.
and still to this day, I still in my head say Metallica
Oh,
just for
totally.
fun when I can't get that
Yeah,
out of
I
my head.
bet you walk down the street, think of it, and laugh suddenly, and people think, "Why is that guy laughing?" Because it's always going to be funny to you. Yeah.
Right. So they, of course, were also playing Slayer, but at the time I was really more into Maiden, Priest, what I call my original six: Maiden, Priest, Dio, Sabbath, Ozzy, AC/DC. Those were my hardcore six. I was starting to get into Metallica and Megadeth, but I didn't really get my first Slayer record till probably like the late 80s, 89, 90, something like that. I got Rain and Blood
Mm.
and was just floored by, I had gradually moved remember hearing Battery by off of Master of Puppets. I remember playing that for a friend in the parking lot at my school, my cassette deck in my car. You have to hear this. It's insane. It's just so fast. It's crazy. And then of
I have
course I
a
heard,
fun, I have a funny story about that song actually. Sorry to interrupt you, but when I was telling you earlier about my friend John who played Master of Puppets to me. He said he didn't actually play it. He gave me the double LP and said, "Go and play this, right?" And this was the 2 LP issue, which was a 45 RPM LP, and I didn't know that, right? And I played it on 33 RPM. So, but imagine how heavy that was, right? So the start, the battery starts off even at regular speed. Though the acoustic intro is battery, and then the electric intro is quite heavy, right?
yeah.
And then but I didn't get that. I didn't know for ages. I had a cassette where I just played it on 33 RPM, so it kind of went doo 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 doom doom doom.
It's
And then when
awesome
the
doom
vocals
metal.
started, yeah, and then when the vocals started, it was lashing out the action. It was incredible. It's actually on YouTube, someone's recorded it at 33 RPM, and that was what I had for ages, right? And then when I heard it at the right speed, I thought, what the hell is this? This is ridiculous. Sounds like a small child. And then, but then of course I got into it. But for ages I was walking around, and I happened to know that Thomas Fisher from Celtic Frost and now Triptychon, he had the same experience. I think in his case, he played a Venom song at 33 RPM instead of 45, so it sounded insanely heavy and threatening. And so he inadvertently had the same experience as me. Um, but battery is responsible for a lot, which is why I bring that story up, because you mentioned it, because it was such a, it was pretty fast and heavy, right? But I guess you were going to go on to say that Slayer was
Well,
heavier and
yeah,
faster.
then I thought battery was the be all end all, like it just
Yeah.
couldn't get any more faster. And Battery and Damage Incorporated,
Well,
I thought,
damage is a pretty fast and heavy song to this
yeah, I
day.
was like, it can't get any faster than this, right? And then I heard Slayer and was like, wow, this is just. And for me, the difference when I think of the big four, your Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, and Slayer, Metallica is the sort of new wave of British heavy metal sped up influence, especially on like the first album.
Yeah.
Uh, I think of Megadeth as being like the more progressive technical side of thrash. I think of Anthrax as bringing those slight elements of hardcore in the more
Yeah.
New York sort of fun sound. And Slayer for me it brings in the evil.
I think that's exactly right. What was it? I did an
This
interview. A friend of
dark,
mine,
like
yeah,
scary, like thing.
friend of mine said, Metallica is the cathedral, Slayer is a slaughterhouse.
That's about right.
And you end up using these incredibly macho words, don't you? What I've tried to do actually over the years is talk about this stuff in a way that is a little more nuanced. But it is hard not to use words like, man, this music's crushing, it's pulverizing,
Yeah.
the metal language.
As I was going through the songs that I picked, I had to think, okay, I got to find other words for aggressive
Oh,
and
totally.
fast and
Right. When I did my
thrashing.
Slayer book, listen, when I got my Slayer book, when I wrote my Slayer book, someone wrote to me an email and said, I had to stop reading your fucking book because I couldn't hear the word. I could not read the word malevolent one more time. And I thought, oh my God, this guy's probably got a point. And I had a look. I think I opened the Word document and counted the number of times I said, yeah, it's really malevolent song, really malevolent, dozens of times. So this guy had a point, because I'm like that as well. I can't read a book if something's annoying me for more than a few pages. So there you go. I use that word, overuse that word.
That's fantastic. Well, it applies to the band, so makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so maybe give just a little brief history of Slayer leading up to their first album. So Slayer was formed in 1981 in Huntington Park, California, by guitarist Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman, drummer Dave Lombardo, and bassist vocalist Tom Araya. This lineup would
By the way, it's Araya.
Araya, thank you,
So
Tom Araya. This lineup would remain intact through their first 5 full-length studio albums, which are the albums we will be discussing today. In 1983, the band opened up for the band Bitch. It would be here that Brian Slagel of the newly founded Metal Blade Records would hear them and ask them to contribute a track to his upcoming Metal Massacre 3 album. That song, Aggressive Perfector, would give the band enough attention to prompt Brian Slagel to give them a recording contract with Metal Blade.
There you go.
Like that.
Like
anything else
from
besides
the
my
Bible.
mispronouncing pronouncing
No,
his name?
I normally would not correct you, except we were having that conversation before about mispronouncing words. But yeah, because he's from Chile, isn't he? Right, so it's a Hispanic name. Hence, Araya.
Awesome.
That's very good. Nicely done. Set the scene.
Okay, so then we get here their first album, which is, I only have this one on CD, Show No Mercy. This comes in 1983. It's produced by Brian Slagel and the band. It's self-financed by the band with money from Kerry King's father and Tom Araya.
Araya.
Tom Araya's job as a respiratory therapist. Although the production is primitive, you can hear the seeds of the Slayer sound being planted in songs like Die by the Sword and Black Magic. The band at this point wearing their influences of Maiden, Priest, Merciful Fate, and Venom on their sleeves. The album would go on to be Metal Blade's highest selling record at that time. And as an interesting little musical note, they are not tuned down a half step yet on this album. They
No.
are tuned to regular pitch. So,
Mm.
all right. So, Joel, what are your thoughts on Show No Mercy, and what are your favorite songs? And if you have any other little historical tidbits you want to add, feel free.
Right. So we're not going to go through it track by track. We're just going to give a kind of overview with a couple of cool songs.
Yeah, just give your overall thoughts of the record and then your favorite songs.
Well, I'm glad you said that because for me, this is pretty much the weakest Slayer album, and I can imagine gasps of horror going up around the Slayer among the Slayer faithful who might be watching this, because it is a classic album without a doubt, right? It's like Kill 'Em All, you know what I mean? Or it's like the first Maiden album. It's a classic album. Would I put it on for pleasure? Nah, I wouldn't. Um, Before we talk about that briefly, I just want to talk about Aggressive Perfector, which is on Metal Massacre 3 you just showed us. That's actually a killer song, right? It's really good. It's fast, it's catchy, it's quite dramatic actually. There's a whole intro riff breakdown before the solo, which is kind of cool. And it appears on the expanded edition of Rain and Blood. And the reason why it appears on Rain and Blood is that they had re-recorded it. That was it. Yeah, Slayer re-recorded it for the expanded edition. And if you get a chance to hear the newer version, it's much tighter, it's much better. The scream that Tom does on the original version is slightly out of tune, which
Mhm.
gives it part of its charm. You know what I mean? These imperfections are what give these old metal tunes their charisma. But he hits the note correctly on the revisited version. So that's Aggressive Perfector. Now, for me, in fact, I so rarely listen to Show No Mercy. I have. I'm looking at another screen because I've pulled up the track listing. There's some great songs on there, right? But for me, it's only half an album. I can only really listen to the first 6 songs probably. So Evil Has No Boundaries and the Antichrist are like classics. You know what I mean? They're fast. They're like Venom. Um, they do showcase the beginnings of what Slayer were about. And if you think about what was happening in thrash in early '83, there wasn't really anything out on the record before Kill 'Em All came out um, that was fast, that had those thrash beats. But you were able to go and see if you lived in the Bay Area or LA, Exodus, um, and Metallica and Slayer. You could see them play. You couldn't really pick up a record that had that stuff on until Kill 'Em All came out, and then a bit later in the year when Show No Mercy came out. I'm gonna isolate Fight Till Death, Black Magic. Fight Till Death isn't a commonly played song on this record. It's a bit of a filler track, but it's actually really good. Um, a lot of these riffs on the songs are kind of like they're like Maiden, and they're like weirdly like sort of folk music or Irish music. They kind of go ding the diddly
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? A bit like Thin Lizzy almost, or something very weird until they speed up and they get heavy. And Dave Lombardo does his brilliant things as a drummer. But the production is so muddy, I tend not to listen to those songs, even though I like them. I try to track down live versions if I can. So I know we're not talking about the Live Undead EP today, but yeah, if you ever do, then the version of Black Magic on it is incredible, right? It's really good. Um, I think it's a studio recording with added like audience noise. For the book I did, I interviewed Bill Matoya, who engineered, I think, the first few Slayer albums. And he didn't actually tell me that that was dubbed audience noise on the Live Undead EP, but he kind of laughed about it when I mentioned it. Well, you know, he said, "Isn't that one of those great secrets?" And so on. So I don't actually have much to say about Show No Mercy other than what I've said, which is that Fight to Death is good. I do like Black Magic, but for the live version. And I can't really listen to 4 songs at the end, Tormentor, The Final Command, Cryonics, and Show No Mercy, partly because Jeff's lyrics about the Third Reich are just so embarrassingly crap. I can't take it seriously. And I fully understand and accept that that's an odd thing to say in this context, because you wouldn't listen to Slayer if you ever took lyrics very seriously at all. Because to enjoy a Slayer lyric, whoever wrote it, you have to switch off your critical faculties and just go into it like you would if you're reading The Lord of the Rings or a horror novel or watching a really cheesy horror film. You can enjoy those things, but they don't stand up to critical analysis. So it's a foolish thing to try. Even so, the stuff about the war, you know, Hanneman's obsession with the war, just kind of is too cheesy for me to take seriously on this album. on later albums, he addressed the subject of warfare much more convincingly. So that's pretty much what I have to say about Show No Mercy. I would say it's probably my least favorite Slayer album, even including the last two, three, four albums that we're not talking about today, but had one or two good songs on max. Even they, I think I'd rather listen to them than Show No Mercy. And the songs on Show No Mercy that I do like, I'd rather listen to live versions. So that's pretty much what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I think because I started off in the Maiden, Priest, Dio world, I've always liked this one because you can hear that sort of Iron Maiden
Massively.
influence in here, like you mentioned in some of the guitar lines and the guitar harmonies and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. Ones that I like on this one, and I know the production is not the greatest, but there's a certain charm to it, I think.
Oh, massively. Yeah, yeah. It wouldn't be better if it had a really nice, crispy, modern production
Yeah,
at all. Um,
right.
the other thing is the artwork. I can't take the guy with his metal underwear seriously. Like it's for those who don't know, it's there you go. It's Demon holding a big sword, and
Yeah.
he's got his special underwear, his heavy metal underwear,
All right.
which
I've never noticed
makes
that
me look.
before.
That now you'll never not
I
notice
won't
it.
be able to get it out of my head now.
And I remember thinking, whoever designed this, he must have thought, hey, what kind of pants would he wear anyway? Underpants.
But
Satan's knickers.
songs that I like on this one are "Die by the Sword." I love after the second chorus when it goes into that sort of tempo drop and that chugging part. Die by the sword.
Yeah. Now, I
That's
will say that I'm the
awesome.
same as you in that there are tons of Slayer songs where I'm not that crazy about the whole song, but there's one bit where
Yeah.
I always go, oh my God, I got to go to the end of the second verse because there's this little bit that I have to hear. And then I won't bother with the rest. So,
And I always say on this channel, I'm a big fan of what I call gear shift changes, where it's just
yeah,
going, then all of a sudden it drops down into like a chugging riff, or it speeds up suddenly, or
right.
something like that.
The
I always
songwriters
love
know
that.
that. The songwriters know that that is an adrenalizing moment. Right? People will listen out for that. And Slayer have this great technique of not doing it when you expect they're going to do it.
Yeah.
So normally a riff will go around four times before the sudden fast break, but maybe they'll do it three times just so it happens before you're ready. It's a great little songwriting trick. Killer songwriters, man. I got so much respect for them as composers.
And then I also like Metal Storm Face the Slayer. Again, I think this is,
Dramatic. It's
yeah,
dramatic
very,
stuff.
the intro is very Iron Maiden,
Yeah.
Ice
Yeah.
March,
Totally.
something like that. It's got a little bit of a merciful fate feel
Yeah.
to it there in the intro. And I also like that line, that guitar line. It's actually an odd meter line, and I wonder if Slayer has ever really done any other odd meter things, like do 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 do.
Yeah. It reminds me of
There's actually a measure of five in there, and I just think that
yeah, they
that's
do it on
cool.
the song Cult?
Yeah, yeah.
About 10 years ago. The verse I think is in five.
Okay.
But I'd have to check. Or possibly they might have not written it in five. They might have just written it in four, but just added a bit on to see what happens. You
Accidentally
know how
put
you
it in
do?
five.
Well, no, deliberately, but not really knowing what the time signature is.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly.
Like
I'm sure
you do
that was
stuff
the
and it sounds
case
cool.
with this also. They just
Yeah,
play and just feel it. I also like Black Magic. I think the long fade in is cool. And
yeah.
so, all right. So then we move on to the EP. And I guess normally I might not include an EP in something like this, but I think this is kind of significant. It comes out in June '84.
Mm.
Executive produced Brian Slagle. And I think it's important because it bridges sort of it's like a stepping stone record, and it bridges that gap between the first album and moving the band more towards the Slayer sound that we would come to know and love. Little interesting story that Gene Hoglan was a roadie for the band at this time, and he introduces Dave Lombardo to the double bass, and he hears Gene Hoglan, the two of them talking drums and stuff like that. So
Hoagland plays a massive part in the early Slayer story. Didn't he hold Lombardo's kit down
yeah,
during
that's the other story
Hell
during
Awaits?
this. Apparently, the room that I don't know if that's maybe that's with Hell Awaits, where the room they were recording it in had like no carpeting or something like that, and he had to literally like sit there on the floor, trying to hold the bass drum while Dave was playing.
I've known Gene for years. I speak to him I don't know, every couple of years for various magazines. And I remember when I was doing this book, I said, "Hey, do you want to speak? Talk to me." He said, "Yeah, dude, yeah, great." And I said, and he told me the story about, how Kerry King had a BC Rich a red
Yeah.
one in the early days that was kind of covered in black paint, blobs of black crap all over it.
Yeah.
Gene told me that he did that, right? Gene told me that he put the black paint on, and I spoke to Kerry right after that and told him this one. He said, "No, no, he didn't. I did that. Like, what's Gene talking about?" And but the two of them are quite adamant about this. You know what I mean? So I don't know where that false memory came from one of them. Anyway, Haunting, a big step up. So I know there's only 3 songs on it, but I would listen to those 3 over the whole of Show No Mercy any day. Haunting the Chapel itself is this crazy song, right? I mean, it has this long intro, which is, I mean, it's like they are playing through soup. The sound is so dark. You couldn't remaster or remix this. Nothing would happen. There's no mids. It's hardly the top end. It's just kind of really dark chug with a load of unnecessary reverb. But um, but it's incredible, right? I mean, it's you have to listen to it really loud or you won't hear anything. Um, and it does this long intro which sets the scene quite nicely. I know people who've switched off actually and don't know that there's a really exciting fast part halfway through because they can't be bothered to sit through, 4 minutes of intro. All right. And then when it gets fast, it is nuts. I mean, it's crazy. It's one of those proper adrenalized, pedal to the floor, accelerate as fast as you can while you're listening to its songs. And it's evil as hell. And one of my very favorite moments in the whole Slayer catalog is Tom's evil laugh. The line goes blah blah blah. The house of God has failed. um, I want someone someday to compile a playlist of evil laughs in metal and put it on YouTube because it would be the most fun ever. All these bands do it. Metallica did it on Fight Fire with Fire. Did they?
Yeah.
In a great laugh. Yeah. Anyway, so Tom does the evil laugh. Super fast song. Terrible solo, but it's all part of the fun. And it just ends, and it's the most incredible song. And you're left. I don't know how long it is. Actually, I've got it here. Is it like yes, a few minutes long, 4 minutes. Okay, it's not that long. That's a great song. I'm not really a huge fan of Capture of Sin. I know people do. People love it. It's okay. I get it. It's a bit chuggy for me. I tend not to get that interested in mid-tempo Slayer songs. I'm going to try not to repeat that too many times as we go through this because there are a lot of those. And then you come to Chemical Warfare. Right now, Chemical Warfare is like, I don't know, one of my top 5 Slayer songs, maybe my top 3 when it's played live, because live it's mesmerizingly powerful, right? This one on the Haunting EP isn't quite as gripping for me. It's not as heavy, it's not as fast, right? You know. But obviously it's an amazing song, and it establishes Slayer's amazing lyrical thing, their obsession with war and death, and just people being crushed mercilessly by overlords. You know what I mean? Great. Who doesn't love all that shit? You know what I mean? When I was a teenager, oh man, this is great. And it's scary as hell, and the lyrics are actually kind of good. What's that line? Tom sings, "Mist falls, deadly gas that brings you to your knees." That's not bad, right? Considering they're what, 18? I think he was about 20, the others were 18, 17 when they did this. So yeah, 2 incredible songs. Capture Sin, I get it. It's a classic. I just don't listen to it that much. Great. And it paves the way so beautifully for Hell Awaits.
Yeah, I'm the same as you. The song "Haunting the Chapel" and the first song "Chemical Warfare." Are my favorites on this, and
They're
it's
like all-time classics, aren't they? What can you say?
yeah, and it's really them sort of coming into their sound, and then that leads us
Oh,
to
dude, look
Hell
at Hell Awaits.
Awaits.
Look, keep holding that up for a minute. So I recently ordered a like 5 foot by 5 foot poster of this cover, and I have it hanging in my office.
Nice.
And it's the most incredible bit of art. It's massively ripped off from a French comic. Did you know that?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
So those you can Google this. Those there was a French comic book artist. Was his name Moebius or Mobius? I can't remember. He did a comic strip, and those demons who are sort of impaling or torturing those dudes are in that. So it wasn't Slayer didn't know this, Metal Blade didn't know this. There's no legal problem, right, awaiting this. But those things were just completely copied from some French comic, in 1984 or 85, wasn't it? This came out. You could do that. I love the lettering, which is clearly like, letter set, that kind of like pressed down text that you do. the title itself is incredible. It must have been must have been terrifying for Christian families or whatever in the 80s. It kills me the way that the Slayer logo is resting on a nice kind of like ledge in hell. That was convenient. So again, the artwork is so naive, but I love it so much, and it scared me quite a lot as a teenager. It was one of those album covers that give you a bit of a cold chill when you see it. Now, of course, I see that it's just a bit of wacky 80s artwork. All right, I won't. I'm aware that my answers are quite long, so I don't want to keep you here the entire day, John. But so I'll try to tone down my thoughts about Hello 8. Title track is just just so good, right? I mean, it's so amazing. It's so Tom kind of spits out the lyrics in this sort of amateurish way. Live, again, it's much better. I only listen to live versions of Hello 8. It's one of my favorite songs ever by Slayer. And I love Kill Again as well, the one that follows, right? That most people don't even think about Kill Again. It's incredible. It has this, you were talking about the moments, the key moments that make you crazy. There's a bit when, I guess they tune down to E flat at this point. There's a bit when the second solo comes in and they drop down to E, and it has the tritone in it. So for those who don't know, who are watching this, tritone is an augmented fourth or diminished fifth, a particular interval that sounds quite demony. And if you want to know it, you only have to look at that Black Sabbath album behind you, John. And there it is. First track on that record is a tritone. And that appears in Kill Again. And then you got Praise of Death, which is amazing. Just a really long kind of, it has a little bass solo in, doesn't it? Necrophiliac as well. I'm such a big fan of that song. In fact, there is not a bad song on here. I even like Hardening of the Arteries, which is the weakest song on there. And the reason why I like it is not because of the music, but because of Jeff's lyrics. They're absolutely existentially miserable. Like in Hardening of the Arteries, which I think is by Jeff, he writes about how there's nothing out there to save us. There's no God. All there is misery and death. And that's quite advanced thinking for a youngish teenager, right? On the one hand, yes, it's very Dungeons and Dragons. I get it. You know what I mean? The devil, cloven hooves, all that stuff. But at the same time, that's probably an accidental, but nonetheless quite a powerful exercise in existential thinking. And it's set to a fairly aggressive song as well. And that's amazing. But rather than go through every little song, let's just say every song's great. I love them all. I could talk to you about Hello 8 all day as I could Rain in Blood, which I couldn't so much with the albums afterwards, so I won't be quite as chatty as I am now. But I would give this record 10 out of 10 and fight anybody who disagrees.
Fantastic. What I like about too these early albums, even though the production on the first record isn't particularly good, you can hear his bass. This is sort of a complaint, like with the next three records, the
Right.
bass sort of gets lost a little
Completely.
in the records, and I like the fact that you can actually hear the bass here inside the music. For this record we mentioned for the first album, Show No Mercy, they funded it themselves, but now they're at a point where Brian Slago believes in them enough to give them a budget. He brings in some other people, engineers and stuff like that to
It's
help.
not so much, sorry to butt in, it's not so much that he believes in them. He literally had no money before. They had nothing. The reason why Tom had to fund it and Kerry's dad had to give him loans because Brian had no money. So just to clarify, he believed in Slayer right from the get-go. He just couldn't give him any money because he didn't have any.
Yeah, oh, there you go.
Good guy, Brian. I hope you meet him sometime. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's and I'm sure when Slayer came on with Metal Blade, it was very early days. So it was mom, and he was operating it himself, and I'm sure he had
It was a
little to no, little to no
broadly similar
budget.
setup to the Megaforce setup on the other side of America. In that they had no money, they did it all on nothing. I don't know how they did it,
Yeah.
but I'm glad they did.
All right. Well, I really like Hell Awaits, like you mentioned. I like that long, spooky intro with the
Oh, it's great.
backwards thing there. It's a join us, go backwards. And I love the spot in the song where it's like the drums sort of drop out or it drops down a little bit, and Tom is spitting out those fast lyrics.
Rotten hell eternally.
Yeah, it's almost like
Great. I love that. That's a
fast.
very adrenalized moment. That's
Yeah.
one of those moments where, as you say, it's just waiting to kick off. Oh man, I could talk about that song all day, but I won't.
Kill Again, I also really like that. And
Mm.
At Dawn They Sleep is
Yeah.
one that I also dig here for its
At dawn they sleep. They could have called it They Sleep at Dawn, but that's less metal.
more epic, when it's written this way. All right,
I
well,
love it. Heavy metal semantic, not semantics. What do I mean? What's it called when you have a? I can't remember what the word is. Anyway, here we go. Here we go. All right.
all right. So now we land at this is probably the gateway, or this the first Slayer album, maybe for a lot of people.